Ladies and gentlemen, would you please rise for the official party? Admiral Studeman, General Moorman, Mr. Harris, and Mr. Jimmy Hill. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the playing of our national anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Admiral Studeman, General Moorman, Mr. Schlesinger, Jimmy Hill, distinguished guests, honorees. I am Jeff Harris, the Director of the National Reconnaissance Office, and as you know, we are here this afternoon to honor the builders of our nation's first eyes in space. I bid a special welcome to the honorees, their families. We are so pleased all of you could travel, some of you great distances, not only in miles, but in time, to finally see your Corona pioneers honored for their significant contributions to this nation's security. For the last day and a half, many of you have participated in the CSI's conference, Corona, Piercing the Iron Curtain, a study of Corona's impact on the Cold War. This afternoon, we will take the opportunity to honor the pioneers of the Corona satellite system. We recognize their role in helping to resolve the infamous missile bomber gaps and establishing technical landmarks, many of which happened very quickly and some of which we still depend on today. You have already heard that Corona provided a bunch of space firsts. The first photo reconnaissance from space, the first mapping, the first stereo-optical imagery collected, and that infamous day when we recovered the first film capsule. It was the first object ever recovered from space. It's important to recognize that the methods and technologies that our Corona pioneers developed to allow re-entry vehicles to return safely to Earth made possible the re-entry techniques used for the manned space programs you heard so much about in the 1960s. Many difficult problems were first solved in a short period of time to allow for the successful recovery of Corona film capsules. Many of you in the room no doubt recall all of the unsuccessful attempts and the trials and tribulations to make this all fit together. As we look back on this, it's important to recognize how we did so much in so little time. Looking back, it's easy to see Corona was the first space program to fly 100 missions. The Agena that was used in Corona went on to support many other programs, and today it still holds the world's record for the most space launches, 362. In the 1960s, as the space race to the moon unfolded with the Mercury and the Apollo programs, the Corona team did their spectacular work. operating silently, without fanfare, and without public recognition. And until today, without formal public appreciation for Corona's contribution to both national security and the lunar space race. Today, we take this opportunity to recognize your outstanding service in supporting the critical needs of national security and space technology. It is now time to honor the pioneers and visionaries of the Corona program. While thousands participated in the program, we have chosen to recognize those people who established the Corona program in early 1958, when it was carved out of the Air Force Weapons Program 117L, and who served until its first successful mission, as you all remember, in August of 1960. You pressed ahead in the face of numerous challenges, frequent setbacks, rampant skepticism, and the greatest enemy of all, what was believed to be impossible. The early visionaries who established the environment for the Corona program are at a very important agreement, and we don't want to go by that lightly. President Eisenhower, who saw the need to make sure that information was provided to allow our policy to go forward as an informed policy. General Andrew Goodpaster, who was the President's staff secretary. General Bernard Schriever, who is considered the Air Force's General for Space. Dr. Fritz Oeder, General Bill King, the early directors of Weapon Systems 117L. Without this visionary work, nothing could have happened. But the President depended on a lot of very good technical advisors. We'd like to mention Dr. Jim Killian and Dr. Edwin Land. These visionaries put together the framework, the foundation of which our pioneers could build upon. In addition, we are very pleased today to have other Corona team members who are instrumental in carrying out the program beyond the early successes, driving to provide the substantial improvements we enjoyed over the life of the program. What I think will be amazing to the scientists and the environmentalists and the historians who use this film is to see the dramatic improvements that were made over the 12 years of this program. Thank you for your contributions. We have prepared a video, Corona, Teamwork and Technology. This is a visual tribute to the Corona system and her builders. Today, you will be able to have a glimpse of history in the making during a period of dramatic international events. Would you please start the film?
You are looking at a piece of history. The first photo taken by a camera aboard a reconnaissance satellite. It shows Mishmita Airfield in what was then the Soviet Arctic. The photo was taken on August 18, 1960, by a camera mounted on a satellite called Corona. By today's imagery standards, the photo looks fuzzy and distant. Yet it was of great value because it was the first, one of many firsts for the Corona satellite reconnaissance program. In the decade following World War II, tensions between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world increased as the USSR set up communist puppet governments in occupied Europe. Soviet policies of expansion destabilized neighboring territories and created suspicion and mistrust in the international community. As former Prime Minister Winston Churchill pointed out, it was as if an iron curtain had descended between the Soviet world and the free world. Relations with the Soviet Union deteriorated when it detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949 and hydrogen bomb in 1953. That same year, the first Soviet intercontinental bomber became operational, and concern grew about a bomber gap. The Soviets had the capability to launch a devastating surprise attack. President Eisenhower had an urgent need to monitor the Soviet buildup of conventional and nuclear forces behind the Iron Curtain. National survival depended on accurate and timely intelligence.
No one wants another Pearl Harbor. This means that we must have knowledge of military forces and preparations around the world, especially those capable of massive surprise attack. Secrecy in the Soviet Union makes this essential. In most of the world, no large-scale attack could be prepared in secret. But in the Soviet Union, there is a fetish of secrecy and concealment. This is a major cause of international tension and uneasiness today.
Traditional reconnaissance options were limited. So in 1954, President Eisenhower approved the U-2 program under joint CIA Air Force management. At about the same time, the Air Force began a new effort, referred to as Weapon System 117L, which included a number of Earth-orbiting satellite reconnaissance projects. It was the Soviets' successful launch of Sputnik 1 on October 4, 1957, which inspired a serious commitment to the U.S. space program. The nation was alarmed. Already threatened by a perceived bomber gap, the U.S. now faced a missile gap. Within 4 months of Sputnik, President Eisenhower created NASA to lead the nation's civil space program and establish the Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA, to focus the DoD space efforts. With the concurrence of senior congressional leadership, Eisenhower also approved a new covert satellite reconnaissance program. Spun out of 117L, it was to be jointly managed by the same CIA Air Force team which created the U-2. Publicly christened Discoverer, the program included a biomedical research mission. But the primary mission was intelligence, and the program name was Corona. Corona began under utmost secrecy. The Air Force, specifically its Ballistic Missile Division, would be responsible for the development, launch, and operation of the spaceborne vehicle as well as recovery of the payload. The Central Intelligence Agency would be responsible for developing and procuring reconnaissance equipment and selecting the targets for imaging.
I don't think anyone ever identified with their parochial interest on the Corona program. Right from the get-go, that was a program for the United States, and it drew in CIA, the Air Force, DoD, ARPA in early days, and the Contractor Corps. And they did operate as a cohesive team. Their job was to give the United States a capability it needed very badly, and they did so.
The Corona program was envisioned to be a series of satellites that would carry cameras to photograph denied areas. Launched into polar orbits by Thor boosters, the spacecraft would fly at approximate altitudes of 100 nautical miles and take pictures of selected target areas. The exposed film, returned to Earth in capsules ejected from the satellite, would be snatched in mid-air over the Pacific Ocean and airlifted to processing facilities. Contractors would play leading roles in turning plans into reality. iTech Corporation would design the spaceborne camera. Lockheed Missiles and Space Corporation would develop the upper stage and serve as integrator for the entire effort. General Electric would design and manufacture the recovery capsule. And Eastman Kodak would furnish a new film designed to operate in the unique environment of space. By May 1960, the Corona program was well underway. There had been 11 launches, none of which had achieved mission success. Then, an incident occurred that added urgency to the mission. The shoot-down of a U-2 flight over the USSR on the 1st of May. With aerial photography now denied the nation, the United States urgently needed an alternative. And Corona became that alternative. While the program began as an interim, short-term, high-risk effort, it far exceeded early expectations and would deliver, as history attests, better quality and more plentiful photo reconnaissance than the U-2. The program, so complex and so unique, demanded streamlined management, full commitment of those involved, and extraordinary cooperation between government and industry.
First, as I said, it was a very small program office. And so there were never any problems with coordination within the office because there were just 3 or 4 or 5 of us at the most. So we talked frequently, we knew what was going on all the way along the line. As I said, we generated an absolute minimum of paperwork. We resisted any attempt to have committees or reports or anything like that. We concentrated on making the doggone thing work.
The relationship we had with our contracting officers, with the technical supervision we had from CIA and the Air Force was just an outstanding thing. We looked at the arrangement as purely a team effort. There was never any critical comment. There was only constructive comment between the parties to this, and it was this general support and cooperation that we had that really caused the program to go.
Despite cohesion, streamlined management, and informality, Corona was not an instant success. The first 12 launches were failures for various reasons. The causes were multiple and ranged from launch vehicle misfire on the pad to failure to achieve orbit. And there were instances when, having achieved orbit, the satellite actually entered an incorrect orbit. There were improper capsule ejections and camera failures.
Well, we had a bunch of them, and I guess one of the things you could say is that you learn something from every failure. And so perhaps some of our philosophy evolved from some of our failures. Sure, we were always discouraged, but we really wanted to be always progressing and never repeat a failure. If we were going to have a failure, we wanted to have a new one, not one we'd already had before.
Dogged perseverance paid off, with the success of the 13th launch, publicly announced as Discoverer 13 on August 12, 1960. This flight, designed to test the recovery vehicle, had no camera aboard. The vehicle was successfully launched, orbited, and deorbited. The only hitch was with the capsule splashdown, well away from the planned impact point. Fortunately, a recovery helicopter reached it in time before it sank. While less than perfect, it was another first for mankind: the recovery of a vehicle from space. 1 week after the Discoverer 13 water recovery, Discoverer 14 achieved full success. The vehicle carried a 20-pound load of film. The camera worked perfectly, and a full load of film was exposed and transferred to the recovery capsule. Ejected on the satellite's 17th pass, the film capsule was successfully snatched in midair by an Air Force C-119 aircraft. Just 110 days after the U-2 incident, Corona had made a quantum leap in intelligence gathering by operating from the new high ground of space. 3,000 feet of film were acquired on Discoverer 14's historic flight. More than 1,650,000 square miles of Soviet territory had been photographed for interpretation, providing more coverage than all of the U-2 missions over the Soviet Union throughout previous years. Data like this helped build confidence in the measures taken by our national leaders to counter the growing Soviet threat. Constant technical improvement was a hallmark of the Corona program. Industry's designers and engineers were continually challenged to improve the program's capabilities. Early missions used acetate-based film, which crumbled and jammed repeatedly in the spaceborne cameras. To solve the problem, Eastman Kodak developed the capability to coat a high-resolution emulsion onto a polyester base. This new polyester-based film could withstand the vacuum condition of space. And in later improvements, it was made thinner, permitting the spacecraft to carry more film, thus increasing mission duration.
We started out with 1-day operation, then we went to 2 days operation. Then we took the objective of going for weeks of operation. And things were going pretty well, so we said, let's go for 2 weeks. Well, but by this time, programming the camera was such that they wanted more film. So we put 2 capsules on the vehicle and went from one into the other, and we were able to double the capacity in that process. So it was constantly improving, and that really led to later generations of the same basic techniques in more advanced systems.
And within 1 year, engineers had improved the resolution of the camera. You can contrast the improvement from the first photo with its 8-meter resolution to the 3-meter image gathered in 1961. And when the program ended in 1972, the resolution had been honed to as good as 2 meters. In addition to these improvements, of particular importance was the development of stereo-optical imagery using 2 cameras, one looking forward and the other behind. That meant that photo interpreters could see the images with depth and thus gather additional intelligence for the nation's decision makers. Corona missions carry the Discoverer title through mission number 38, which was launched in February 1962. The program had arrived at a point when this cover story was no longer tenable, and no other story could account for the projected number of launches and their unique profiles. So the Discoverer designation was eliminated, and future missions in the Corona program became classified Air Force operations. Corona imagery helped debunk the missile gap theory. Then it continued to monitor ICBM sites to enforce strategic arms agreements as well as nuclear proliferation treaties.
It was not all, but nearly all, the information we had about the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a denied territory. It was a police state. It was very, very difficult to conduct clandestine operations in the Soviet Union. Because of their enormous consciousness and protection against communication security, it was very hard to listen to them. And so we were totally dependent on the Corona photography, that broad area, medium resolution, but broad area, repetitive coverage of the Soviet Union. And it was that told us where the cards were on the table.
What began as a risky short-term experiment had become the norm for gathering data in which the nation's decision makers had full confidence. That confidence permitted accurate forecasting and planning to keep the peace.
What I remember most about the Corona program, and you have to remember, they did not label these things for me. They just gave me the results, so I didn't necessarily know where it came from. But what I now recognize as the Corona program was extraordinarily valuable to us when the Soviets shifted their deployment to the Far East. In Europe, we had a lot of other sources of information. But when the Soviets moved about 40 divisions to the Far East in the late 60s and began to deploy them along the Chinese border, together with other equipment, the overhead photography was our best source of information.
The 145th and final Corona launch took place on May 25, 1972. Having achieved its purpose, Corona's existence is now unclassified, and its artifacts have been made available to the Smithsonian Institution so that others might gain a sense of how far-reaching the program's unsung heroes were in their pioneering efforts. The camera and 2 buckets from Corona's last flight will be part of a permanent exhibit at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum.
In my mind, it was an extraordinary example. In fact, it was a role model for how these kinds of programs should be conducted. It was the finest hour in those early years, at least. The periods from the beginning of the Corona program until round about '63. That period was characterized by an extraordinary collaboration between the CIA and between the Air Force units that were involved. It was a productive cooperation, one in which the 2 parties complemented one another perfectly and cooperated perfectly for the national good.
The team members who made up the Corona program can take just pride for their achievements in intelligence gathering, as well as their scientific and technical contributions. They have compiled an enviable number of lasting firsts. The first use of a satellite to gather photo intelligence, the first mid-air recovery or catch of a re-entry vehicle, the first mapping of the Earth from space, the first gathering of stereo-optical data from space, the first use of multiple re-entry vehicles, the first space reconnaissance program to fly 100 missions. Corona was the prototype for follow-on photo reconnaissance programs, an unmanned spaceflight endeavor that provided leading-edge technology to future manned spaceflight. As the program resulted in scientific and technical achievements, Corona also served as the model for a new organization, the National Reconnaissance Office, bringing together the best talents of the CIA and the DoD would design, build, and operate Corona's successors. It has been almost 4 decades since an alarmed nation rushed to develop new space technologies for reconnaissance, and the need for timely, accurate intelligence gathered in space has been validated over and over again. Silent sentinels, Corona's successors, today look beyond the horizon to keep watch and alert the nation to new threats. These satellites are instruments of national security, which help guarantee the nation's well-being and remind us that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.
It's really good to see that much magic take place, but it occurred to me watching that film that most of the magic was just that refreshing view that people that work in this high technology of space don't age a bit. And so it's a pretty exciting opportunity. I now have the pleasure of introducing my good friend and our keynote speaker, General Tom Moorman, who is now the Vice Chief of Staff for the United States Air Force. Tom, without a doubt, is a true space cadet. He's one who continues to provide extraordinary leadership to the Air Force, and in particular to the Air Force in space. Tom has been involved with these programs throughout his career, and today when we are talking about the teamwork between the Air Force and the Central Intelligence Agency and the other elements of the Department of Defense, we could think of nobody better to represent this Air Force's role than the current leader of Air Force Space, Tom Moorman.
Thank you, Jeff. Admiral Studeman, Dr. Schlesinger, Dr. McLucas, distinguished guests, friends, and I see an awful lot of friends out there. I'm going to talk today and be a little bit nostalgic, I think, because this is a very special day for me, and if you'll permit me, I may share a few personal observations. I would like to extend my special welcome to the Corona pioneers who we honor today. Extraordinary group of folks whose recognition is long overdue as far as I'm concerned. And in that number, a lot of former bosses that I really look forward to seeing again this evening. I would also like to say that I'm honored and pleased to keynote this. I'm a bit in awe of this audience, so bear with me because I look up to so many of these folks. I used to be responsible for the Corona history when I was a major, and it was a little classified in those days, so I really identify with what we're about, and I really enjoyed seeing that film. I didn't work for Jim Plummer when he looked that young, but as Jeff Harris has said to you, I've spent a lot of my time in the reconnaissance business, and so I think I have some appreciation for the importance of Corona to the national security and to the Air Force, and the significance to the Air Force. The Corona pioneers that we honor developed, launched, and operated the world's first photo reconnaissance system. You've heard many times the extraordinary technological feat that is, but it bears repeating again. It was an amazing feat in the period of time that it was developed and how successful it was. You've also heard, I'm sure, that it really shaped the Cold War, and I'll come back to that theme. You are not only pioneers, but you are extraordinary patriots as well. And that's what I'm so pleased about, is that the recognition is finally coming as the Cold War has drawn down. The role of satellite reconnaissance is of incalculable significance in how that Cold War came to a close. Equally important, let me highlight and praise the folks who led us to today that push for this declassification. I think it is long overdue. I think it's extremely important. It is a story that the country needs to hear about. Corona undoubtedly was a watershed program. It's the genesis of a unique technological, operational, and management teaming relationship that culminated in extraordinary space capability. You pioneers took 4 concurrent programs, satellites, cameras, launch vehicles, and aerial recovery, and set the standard for a lot of unique things. First of all, and I think John McMahon and Jim Plummer had it just right, streamlined management and extraordinary cooperation. But routine rocket launches, in fact, they were a lot more routine then than they are now, I might add. Worldwide satellite command and control, unique films and cameras for space, and secure communications interconnectivity. These remain today, 35 to 40 years later, phenomenal achievements. In fact, I can count on one hand the number of countries that possess anything like that capability that flew in 1960. It's a tribute to your skill and devotion that you, and I'll borrow a phrase from Winston Churchill, were able to accomplish so much with so few for so many. I've been asked to talk how Corona affected me personally, and secondly, the role of Air Force in Corona and how this program affected the future role of the Air Force in space. But I want to stress first and foremost, and I don't want this group to ever forget, is that it was a national program, as John McMahon said. It was, I believe, one of the best examples of cooperation between the CIA industry and the Air Force. And all that marvelous coalition working together was the reason this program had such phenomenal success. I know many of you all have been at George Washington over the course of the last day, hashing over Corona and reconnaissance history. But I would like to share a side of Corona that I'm particularly familiar with, and that's the exploitation analysis. And if you'll permit me a comment about where I was at the time, because Corona had a very direct influence on my life and my career. When I got exposed to Corona, I was already accepted to law school and ready to do something entirely differently. But in 1963, I got tapped on the shoulder to go out to March Air Force Base from Kansas to go and exploit Corona imagery and U-2 imagery. The reason for that is pretty simple, is that SAC was busy trying to target the Soviet Union to serve as that deterrent. But our maps could nowhere near keep up with the new intelligence. And as a consequence, a bunch of interpreters were tasked to look at the imagery and literally draw the new towns and new rivers and things such that that could now be put into the bomb runs and the target materials for our missile and bomber sorties. In addition, soon after that, I got tapped to augment reviewing Corona imagery for new missile sites. And I can't tell you how extraordinarily energizing and exciting that was. Literally scores of young Air Force PIs and agency PIs at NPIC were poring over this imagery, this treasure trove of data. And when we saw ground scarring, we tasked and followed it, and after a while saw missile silos being constructed. And with each one that was discovered, literally a cheer went up, and you put it up on your tote board. And a target was assigned to the SAC PSYOP. Extraordinarily heady stuff for a lieutenant. So heady that I decided that maybe the law could wait. And so I entered into a career in the reconnaissance business, and it was extraordinarily exciting. U-2s, SR-71s, and satellite reconnaissance. And I'm extremely proud of my association with this program. It really made me pleased to go to work. It made me swell with pride when I thought I was part of the process that led to the deterrent. The period at which the Corona system was developed is an interesting time, and maybe I should go back and just touch on that. And in 1960 was the height of the Cold War, but a lot of other things were going on. Cuba was in revolution. President Eisenhower had threatened action if they go communist. Fidel Castro at that time had not declared his intent. General Ridgway was the Chief of Staff of the Army, and he had pledged that the Army would, by the time he finished his tour, would all be mobile. Nobody would walk in the Army. UN troops were in the Congo, and the Eisenhower administration had a $500 million surplus. Oh, for the good old days. The defense budget was a whopping $40 billion, which included funds for Polaris submarines, B-70s, and an Air Force satellite called Samos. Only the Polaris survived out of that. The Pirates won the 1960 World Series, and you could go to the Yankee Stadium on a 15-cent subway token. Life was a lot simpler. Nevertheless, as that film pointed out, the potential for nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union was at its height, I think, in the late 50s and early 60s. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 and their ICBM and nuclear weapon testing efforts had really rekindled the fear of a nuclear Pearl Harbor. President Eisenhower was intent on preventing just such a holocaust by making the Iron Curtain transparent and assessing the alleged missile and bomber gaps. Early attempts to breach the Iron Curtain involved Air Force and CIA flying all number of reconnaissance aircraft in, over, and around the Soviet landmass. The quintessential breakthrough came obviously in 1955, when the patriarchs of aerial reconnaissance, Richard Bissell and Kelly Johnson, christened the U-2 when we began that aerial overflight of the Soviet Union landmass. But everyone clearly knew that we would either be denied that flight diplomatically or one day the U-2 would be shot down. As a consequence, in 1958, the Corona program began, and once again the CIA and the Air Force were teamed on yet another crucial reconnaissance project. August 20th, 1960 was really a bittersweet day when you think about it. Discoverer 14's bucket containing the results of the first photo reconnaissance mission was being retrieved, but at the same time, Gary Powers was being sentenced to 10 years in a Russian jail, reminding us the vulnerability of aerial reconnaissance over denied areas and just how frigid the Cold War was under the Khrushchev era. The spotlight was now focused on satellite reconnaissance. Well, with old-fashioned American grit and determination, you pulled it off. Richard Bissell and General Angie Goodpaster kept the program support up inside the Beltway. Well, I guess we didn't have a Beltway. Inside Shirley Highway. Benny Schriever and General Ozzie Ritlin scraped the dollars together within the DoD budget. Colonel Paul Worthman and Lee Battle launched through 12 failures to eventually field an entirely new concept of intelligence collection. And frankly, you pioneers, you all who worked on this program, sowed the seeds for the inevitable Cold War victory. For the first time in military history, satellite imagery was woven into the national fabric of decision-making. Your systems peered over the Iron Curtain and debunked the missile and bomber gaps. Now national policymakers began making decisions based on highly reliable, routine collected intelligence from space. And Bud Wheelon had it right there. Medium resolution, broad area, repetitive coverage. That intelligence and associated assessments gave President Eisenhower and every succeeding president the upper hand in dealing with international crisis. Your imagery also gave the National Command Authorities unprecedented strategic indications and warning. Moreover, Corona imagery provided the precise targeting to put teeth in our strategic deterrent posture. And your routine collection, the first national technical means, provided the assurance to permit arms control agreements. Well, the Air Force, CIA, and industry team has come a long way. From Discoverer 14, which stayed on orbit only a day, yet photographed more square miles than all U-2 missions had to date, to the current systems which stay on orbit for years. The Air Force invested several hundreds of millions of dollars in Corona. Today, unfortunately, I spend that much on one satellite. But Corona spawned an entirely new national capability. You put in place a program that captured the imagination of national security planners, which quickly led to gathering and disseminating space data not only from reconnaissance, but surveillance, weather, communications, and navigation satellites as well. Information that had traditionally been provided strictly by terrestrial means now were being provided from space. As a result of Corona, we had captured the high ground, the fourth medium. Corona was the engine that drove the Air Force to invest in space capabilities and today to become the space service for the Defense Department. For example, the satellite control network that we have today began with rudimentary tracking sites placed on the flight paths of low-orbiting polar satellites so we could communicate with them. Charlie Murphy saw to that, as well as Moose Matheson, despite Moose's public relations coup on Discoverer 13. Secure space and ground-based communication systems were developed to relay data to processing and exploitation centers. This dedicated communication system often drove the state-of-the-art. Corona was the impetus for future space research and development funding. We pushed the envelope even further. The Air Force's Defense Meteorological Satellite Program was spawned out of the need to precisely predict weather over the Soviet Union. With a precious and finite commodity such as film, we had to ensure that our targets were as cloud-free as possible. And of course, there's launch. Corona drove the buildup at Vandenberg. People often forget that. When we started thinking about Corona, Vandenberg wasn't even called Vandenberg. It was Cook. How prophetic that after successfully launching Discoverer 13 through some fog at Vandenberg, Lee Battle boasted to the New York Times that the Thor and Atlas had achieved near all-weather launching capability. He said, quote, "Only weather bad enough to prevent men from working on the pad could halt a shot," unquote. Now, you kind of like that spirit, view of the way we do business today. Well, the Air Force just released its RFP for an evolved expendable launch vehicle, and that's the grandson of that Thor and Atlas. And I'll bet I don't get an all-weather capability out of that. The point of all this is that we have a sophisticated, superior national security space force. We are the only country that offers a full-service space force. That all started with the Corona program. You pioneers blazed the trail, and people like Jeff Harris and I are pleased to continue with your tradition. Thank you again for asking me to be part of this ceremony. It is a very emotional time for me because it is such a significant program in my life. I will remind you of something else. Last night, Jeff Harris gave me the Corona book with all the top secrets lined through. And I have never talked to my wife about what I did for 15 years. And that was an interesting visual aid, I'll have to admit. You know, and I had this feeling, can I really be saying this? But I was very proud to show her that book and very proud of my association. I really look forward to seeing you all tonight, seeing a lot of former bosses, a lot of people that I stand in awe of, and a lot of good friends. Let me close by saying that the Corona pioneers started the national transition to space, not just space reconnaissance. Your simple but most important legacy is, and I hope you don't forget this, is a safer and more predictable world. For that, the nation is forever grateful. The Air Force is extremely proud to have partnered in this process, in this very noble mission. On behalf of the Air Force, I salute you all. In the military services, a salute is rendered for respect and recognition. I've long respected you, and your recognition is long overdue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Moorman. It's just been a real pleasure to have you here to focus us all on exactly what an extraordinary accomplishment our pioneers have provided to the country. As we move along in this ceremony, I want to read to you a letter we have received. Vice President Al Gore has been instrumental in helping to ensure that the substantial archive of information that was established by the Corona program is available to scientists, scholars, and historians. I consider this a rebirth for the Corona imagery. We are bringing it out of the archive where it has been safely stored away, making copies of it available both in film form and on the internet. Corona is a gift back to the country, a gift that we believe that we'll keep on giving. The Vice President has sent you each a personal letter because of his interest in this celebration. And so today we will present each one of you with a letter that reads as follows. 35 years ago, our nation called upon you to provide technical leadership to allow us to collect important national security information. I would personally like to thank you for your significant contributions to the success of the Discover Corona programs. Your efforts and those of your colleagues resulted in a remarkable accomplishment, an imagery record of the Earth that continues to provide this country with priceless information. Our nation is deeply indebted to you. On behalf of all Americans, thank you for a job well done. Al Gore. I would like to add my personal thanks to the visionaries and the pioneers. You are the iconoclasts and the risk takers. Many people said it couldn't be done, but you went off and you did it. Motivated by acute national need, you saw what needed to be done, and the history books are recording this success, and we owe you a debt of gratitude. What we're going to do now is run through each of the sectors of this small and tightly integrated program, and I'll begin with the program managers. In the military, the top leaders are called generals or admirals. In industry, they are chief executive officers and chairman of the board. In a world of satellite development, we call them program managers. The program managers oversees the design, creation, production, delivery, and performance of the product. For the Corona program, 2 individuals share the title of program manager, providing the leadership necessary to take Corona from the drawing pad to the launch pad in months. Dick Bissell. As father of the Corona program, Dick was relentless in ensuring that its progress and its success was achievable. He instilled cooperation among the government and industry team and developed strong national support through the early failures we've spoken of. General Ozzie Ritland. Ozzie was Dick Bissell's deputy and managed the Air Force support to Corona, including launch, control, and recovery phases. The program office. The program office served as Corona's nerve center, coordinating the activities of CIA, Air Force, and industry under the tightest security. The Corona program office was the epitome of Lee Battle's laws. Keep the program office small, keep it quick reacting, and don't allow anyone to get in your way at all cost. Today, we honor the people who established that tenet, which is the backbone of our satellite program management today.
Edward F. Bloom managed Lockheed's engineering, development, and manufacture of the Agena A, B, and D upper stages, to which the Corona payload was integrated. He oversaw modifications of the standard Agena for use in other government programs as well, and was responsible for the Agena launch pad development. Buzz Bazard led Corona's systems integration and operations, in which he was responsible for ensuring that all launch, on-orbit, and recovery activities were implemented according to plans before and after each mission. It was his job to get the program back on track when glitches or failures occurred. Ralph Ford assisted Paul Worthman in the day-to-day implementation of the Corona development. His diligence in moving the program forward spanned all portions of Corona: contracting, security, technical, integration, launch, and administration. Bill Johnson oversaw the development of Corona's increasingly complex payloads and recovery capsules, working closely with contractors. He was the final responsible government person to sign off on each contractor delivery of cameras and recovery capsules. Dick Moore came to the Corona program from training with industry at Douglas, which made him a natural to oversee the Thor booster activities. Working with the Thor program office and Douglas, he was instrumental in getting the Thor modified and improved when greater performance was required. Red Shepard, as General Ritland's executive officer and later as General Schriever's program director, established the early processes and procedures that provided the transition between the unclassified Discoverer program and the classified CIA activities. He interacted with senior Air Force leadership to maintain booster funding and was also responsible for the establishment of the Autumn Leaves Study to determine how conventional film could be modified to survive the space environment. Paul Worthman headed an Air Force laboratory which developed aerial recovery equipment. He adapted these procedures designed for hooking and reeling in packages parachuted from high-altitude balloons to capturing recovery systems from space. He later replaced Red Shepard as the principal interface between the CIA and the program office. He was also the Corona director during the period of greatest activity. A round of applause for the program.
The program staff. The program staff was the senior Air Force and CIA managers of the Corona program. These folks were supported by a staff of CIA officers and engineers. These staff members played the lead role in procurement and acquisition, many times directing the creation of technology never imagined for spaceflight.
Daniel Kelly was the Corona contracting officer who negotiated the initial contract with Lockheed Missiles and Space Company in April 1958. At a time when no one had ever launched a stabilized platform in space, recovered an object from space, or built a long focal-length panoramic camera, Dan convinced the contractor they could be ready for the first launch in 10 months. He would It hasn't changed. He was right, and his enthusiasm helped mold the team. James McDonald served as the principal liaison between the Pentagon's Advanced Research Project Agency and the CIA Corona Program Office during the formative years of the program. His fiscal skills helped to keep the Corona program moving forward in spite of his early launch failures. John Parangowski served as the deputy chief, then later as the chief of the Corona Program Office development staff. Throughout 1959 and 60, John guided the technical efforts of the contract team. He is known as one of the finest team builders to have ever worked in the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. John's talent in forging together a government contractor team was an essential element of the program's success. A round of applause for the program staff.
Operating under strict secrecy, the launch team was responsible for sending 145 Corona missions into space. Numerous launch operations under tight timelines often left little time for practicing new procedures or testing modifications made to the boosters or payloads.
Roy Lefstad was the launch control officer on the Corona program at Vandenberg, where the system came together. He worked many long days and many long hours on the launch pad with the Lockheed and Douglas people as they checked out, tested, and prepared the Agena and the Thor for launch. Rob Roy was one of the first Air Force officers at Vandenberg Air Force Base assigned the task of launching Corona on the Thor Agena. As the first Corona launch controller, he developed the test procedures and countdown manuals, and he manned the blockhouse for the early Corona launches. A round of applause for the launch base team.
Once the Corona spacecraft reached its orbit, a team of operations personnel conducted its activities, directed its photo operations, attitude control, and the deorbit of satellite capsules back to Earth. While less visible than other program elements, their mission was equally dramatic.
Forrest McCartney was at the Satellite Test Center and responsible for the on-orbit control of early Corona satellites. Forrest also served as the commander's executive officer and was at the console during the first successful Corona mission. Charles Murphy served as the first Corona Field Technical Director at the Advanced Projects Integration Facility, now known as Skunk Works. At this facility, the cameras, the reentry vehicles, and the payload spacecraft came together for testing prior to shipment to Vandenberg Air Force Base. Charlie managed the integration, test, launch, and on-orbit operations of the Corona system. Pat O'Toole was a control chief for Corona operations at the Satellite Test Center at Sunnyvale and supervised the daily controllers. He led his team to develop revolutionary operational procedures to control the on-orbit satellite. Curly Webb served as the deputy at the Lockheed Advanced Projects Integration Facility, Skunk Works. An expert in photo reconnaissance, he played an important role in the test and acceptance of the camera systems and also in the on-orbit operations of the satellites. The operations team.
All of the activities of designing, building, and launching the Corona spacecraft were important, but the real culmination of the events was the dependency on the successful recovery of the film capsules. Without film recovery, there would be no photography to evaluate. On Mission 13, a Corona capsule was the first object ever recovered from space. The recovery group was responsible for creating this miracle, a combination of technology, luck, and sheer determination.
Gus Aola commanded the 6594th Recovery Group and was responsible for the total Corona recovery effort. Gus supervised extensive training of the test squadron crews and improvised on techniques and overall familiarization in flying the probable ocean recovery areas. His emphasis on training and rehearsals with the Navy were critical to the success of Corona recovery operations. Andy Anderson was a navigator with the 6593rd Test Squadron Special and participated with the ops staff of the 6594th Recovery Control Group. Andy coordinated operational matters with the various participants of the recovery effort, designed and installed equipment for Victory ships for aircraft pickup of the Corona buckets. He was a special training project officer for recovery gear and direction-finding gear crews on aircraft. Arthur H. Graff was an operations officer with the 6594th Recovery Control Group. Art prepared operations orders and conducted conferences with the various Corona participating support organizations, including several Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and FAA elements. He conducted a final combined briefing for all the participants on the day of each mission. Art had an outstanding grasp of the many details that he had to be thoroughly examined and procedures worked out in specific detail. Janet Tsutomi was the commander's secretary who worked continuously from the day of activation until the unit's final deactivation, December 58 through September 1986. Janet was skillful, intelligent, tactful, and possessed an outstanding attitude. You'd have to. Janet was a totally dedicated person, all of which contributed greatly to the success of the Recovery Control Group's mission. And finally, Harry Conway. Harry was the pioneer in air-to-air pickup of space capsules used in the Corona program. As early as 1943, he pioneered procedures at Wright-Patterson Field for aerial pickup of downed airmen from the ground. In the 50s, Harry was a key engineering assistant for the full development of the aerial pickup technique as employed by the Corona program. As an industrial consultant, he worked with the 6593rd Test Squadron Special, where he trained pole handlers, air crews, and winch operators in preparations for a successful recovery. A round of applause for the recovery group.
I have to remark upon Janet's success in working with so many egos all put together in one place and still having such a good attitude about it. So we thank you, Janet. During the Corona program, Lockheed's Missile and Space Company, today known as Lockheed Martin, served as the technical advisor and integrator of all Corona equipment, with the exception of the Thor booster. Lockheed also developed the Agena upper stage, which orbited the camera into space. Lockheed's had a standard, difficult for follow-on space programs to beat delivering the first spacecraft for launch within a year of signing the initial contract.
James W. Plummer was the Corona program manager at Lockheed and had overall responsibility for the project. Jim led the Lockheed team from the early days of Weapon System 117L through the difficult formative years of Corona, all the way to Corona's full operational capability. He is the one person from industry most directly responsible for the success of Corona. Fred O'Green was the manager for the design, manufacture, and test of the Agena vehicle for Corona. He was a strong leader with a very active involvement in all phases of the program. He was always present at the scene of the action and was famous within the group for his calling people in the early hours of the morning to have them come to the test center and work on a technical problem. He was a very demanding supervisor, but never asked anyone to work harder than he did. A round of applause for the Lockheed team.
In conjunction with Boston University's Physical Research Laboratory, iTech engineers built the nation's first space cameras. Overcoming the inhospitable environment of space, iTech solved problems such as static discharge, fogging, extreme heat and cold, a terrible environment as we launched the camera, operated it in space, and then had return capsules to Earth. For 12 years, iTech cameras photographed 385 million square miles of the Earth's surface, resolving objects as fine as a 6-foot resolution.
Dick Leghorn was Chief of Intelligence and Reconnaissance Systems Development at the Pentagon. Dick was a true visionary in the field of airborne and space reconnaissance developments, including origination of the open skies concept. As a consultant to the USAF Scientific Advisory Board and to the Special Assistant to the President for Disarmament Affairs, he was the principal contributor to the early Corona camera development. In late 1957, Dick was co-founder and the first president of iTech Corporation. Walter Levison was the camera designer and assistant director of Boston University. Walt was the project manager for the balloon reconnaissance cameras and the designer of the HIAC panoramic camera system. During his assignment as general manager of iTech's Defense Systems Division, Walt was the principal proponent of the proposal that Corona employ a high-resolution 24-inch focal length lens and a panoramic camera to be used on a stable body space vehicle. Frank Madden was iTech's chief engineer for the development of the HIAC panoramic camera and subsequently was responsible for all engineering development of the Corona camera system through most of its evolutions. As chief engineer, Frank was responsible for the physical design, development, manufacturing, and operation of the early system and later assumed the role of Corona camera project manager. His signal contributions, including the unique star wheel mechanism to time the movement of the complex optical system and elimination of the static Corona, which was present in the early imagery. And finally, John Wolf. John was iTech's first program manager on the Corona camera development effort because of his extensive experience on the panoramic cameras for the balloon reconnaissance programs. John retained this responsibility for a number of years, providing guidance for subsequent program success. A round of applause for the iTech team.
The successful return of Corona buckets yielded thousands of frames of film for processing and analysis. Eastman Kodak not only manufactured the film for the Corona system, but also built the printers, the processors, and other support equipment. Kodak's efforts to enhance the film and resolve problems were critical to the program's success.
James Alcofer was instrumental in investigating and characterizing the unique technical challenges for high-altitude reconnaissance films. He helped develop and define the film sensiometric and spatial performance requirements for the program and assisted the government in monitoring operational system performance. Donald Schoessler was the liaison with the Kodak Film Manufacturing Division, providing the interface necessary for communicating the program's film requirements and directing development of films to these unique requirements. These efforts provided excellent film products, developed, manufactured, and packaged to meet the precise requirements of the film transport and camera imaging systems. Richard Stowe provided management and technical guidance for the development, integration, and quality assurance of Kodak ground handling equipment for films, chemistries used to government facilities, and for processing and duplication of the program films.
Our last group of honorees this afternoon are from the General Electric Company, whose former aerospace division is now part of Lockheed Martin. These individuals hold the distinction of having built the first object ever successfully retrieved from space, designing a shiny round capsule that in over 12 years would return 800,000 images worth much more than their weight in gold.
Ingard Clausen was the original program manager for the SRV assembly at General Electric. Ingard helped design the recovery system, which was the first man-made object to return to the Earth from space. Edward A. Miller was an original Corona project engineer and the Corona program manager when the first satellite recovery vehicle was successfully recovered from space. The SRV would be the first man-made item to ever be returned to Earth from space, surviving the harsh reentry environment. He led the team which successfully developed the Recovery Vehicle 4 in record time. Mark Morton was the general manager of the General Electric Reentry Systems Division with overall responsibility for all aspects of the General Electric support to the Corona program. As such, Mark ensured that all the GE support to Corona was delivered on schedule for this accelerated program. Finally, Hilliard Page was the General Electric Facility General Manager with overall system responsibility for the development of the Corona bucket reentry system. He was well known for personal engineering contributions to the Corona of a highly technical nature. A round of applause for the General Electric team.
I would like to reiterate that none of the successes that we're talking about today could be possible without the extraordinary dedication and the talents that we draw upon from the government's industrial partners. The teamwork between the government and industry and between the different components of industry were a substantial part of the program's success. I would now like to introduce the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, Admiral Bill Studeman. Bill Studeman has been involved in, I think, every single aspect of the intelligence process during his career. And today, as our host here in the auditorium, he will provide some remarks. Bill?
Well, let me say first, on behalf of those in contemporary intelligence, let me greet, welcome all the distinguished guests, the senior general officers here. I don't see many naval officers around. And certainly the pioneers and all of those of you who have been associated in the past with this great program. As Tom Moorman was speaking about the early days of Corona, I was trying to reflect on where I was. I was working inner space at the time. An equally hostile environment, and I think in the context of the intelligence programs that were associated with undersea warfare and the other aspects of that will be light years behind you in terms of disclosure in that particular area. Nevertheless, I think it's ironic that I'm here, but I stand in humble awe of the achievements of this program and say to you that your legacy is significant, and I think in the context of my association later on with outer space, certainly the spirit, the level of achievement, the professionalism, the simply magical results of your efforts, I am proud to say, have continued with your successors. So as we conclude one of the most long-delayed award ceremony in intelligence history, allow me to echo the praises we've heard over the last 2 days. The people who made Corona fly overcame enough obstacles to kill 10 projects, maybe more. Their achievements were spectacular and revolutionary. The imagery from Corona changed the face of intelligence and altered the course of the Cold War, and this public recognition is long, long overdue. The reconnaissance satellites that inherited the legacy of Corona continue to change the course of history today. Time and time again, satellites provide information that informs the decisions of our leaders and gives them warning that allows them the time that they need to explore their options. Satellites provided information on North Korea's nuclear program, an early warning when Saddam Hussein deployed 2 elite Republican Guards divisions to the Kuwaiti border just last fall. Satellites made the difference in the Gulf War. To state it in the simplest terms, the United States was sighted and Iraq was blind. The technology of these modern intelligence systems owes a tremendous debt to the people that we are honoring today. And indeed, the United States owes a tremendous debt to these individuals. It is hard to guess what course the Cold War would have taken if we had continued to make our decisions based on what we imagined, feared, or mirror-imaged the Soviet strength to be. Suppose we had not had the capability to verify arms control agreements. Those agreements could never have been signed. Now that the Cold War is over, we are too quick to forget that the threats were real and the urgency was real and that our victory was not, in fact, inevitable. I believe the Corona project also proves the value of real access to denied information. It brings us back to the roots of modern intelligence and reminds us that our first obligation is to find ways to penetrate targets which are threats to our security. It inspires us today as we struggle to debate the role of intelligence and secrecy in American society. Most of all, Corona reflects that which is best about this country: the application of technology innovation, the management partnership between and among government organizations working with industry, all to solve seemingly impossible problems. In solving these problems, the imaginative Corona project offered U.S. policymakers new information and opened up new diplomatic horizons which serve, if problems are acted upon, to strengthen the collective peace and reduce the prospects for intercontinental nuclear war. Information and intelligence is truly power in the modern age, and in the historical context, Corona might be considered an appropriate instrument of Toffler's third wave, the so-called information age. And think how far out ahead you were of your time. I'm proud also to report that the spirit of innovation and the utility of applications continues into the newer and more advanced success or technologies successors to Corona. The quality which went into Corona has allowed U.S. intelligence, with the current lean intelligence budgets, to live off U.S. reconnaissance satellites which are functioning beyond their projected mission duration. Without this legacy of quality, performance, and continuous improvement, the United States would be faced with undesirable conditions of diminished sources and methods in the reconnaissance area. So, to conclude, on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency and the U.S. intelligence community, and on behalf, again, of what's already been said, a grateful nation, I want to thank you for your contribution that you've made to the safety and freedom of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have had just a wonderful opportunity this afternoon to review the success stories of the past. We apologize that it took 35 years. It was ever so apparent. This seemed very simple when we worked with the Vice President and then the President when we got the signed presidential order that allowed for this declassification, that we recognized that it was time to finally thank you, our pioneers. And so we said to staff, let's go off and have a small celebration and just gather these people around the flags so we can thank you. You have moved a few times over the last 35 years. And what started off as a very simple task of taking into account this streamlined management that wrote very little down so that we could pull these records together and cause this afternoon to be successful. I would like to thank all of the folks who've helped pull these events together, because it has allowed us. And for Colonel Phil Datema, Bob McDonald, Pat Casey, Pat Wilkerson, Catherine Snyder, Carrie Chun, Ed Medina, Bob Cox, thank you all very much. There was a whole team that supported those folks, but we owe a lot to them. And again, it's been said, the country would not be where it is today without the pioneering efforts that you did. And for the engineers in the audience, it is always good to see the engineering discipline being applied in an artful form to solve problems of national concern. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the exit of the official party. Yeah. This concludes the formal part of this afternoon's ceremony. Nate Lindsay, please call your office. Thank you very much.